Wonderful to see all of you, and I'm going to say it. Lord is in this place, and He's alive. He's alive. Okay, so please give us your ears. The title of the message for today is Two Robbers. It's a very provocative title. And I want to tell you a story of these two robbers, and probably the most famous, the world's most famous robbers in history. I am not exaggerating. Okay? But so what? They are famous, right? The story that I want to tell you is the miracle of God at that last hour of that one of the two. One come to know Jesus, and he receives the greatest blessing. And that's what I want to tell you about. Okay, story of two robbers, and we'll be looking at the crucifixion for next several weeks. Not really as a, not so much about the sentiment or pain and things like that, but as the gospel writers record, we want to look at it as a historical document. What is actually recorded in these gospel records, okay? Rather than we try to create it to be very sentimental and emotional. And that's what we plan to do. If you look at the Gospels, especially the Gospel of John that we are looking at, you will find something very, very striking. And that striking fact is that the Gospels, and John's Gospel particularly, does not focus on sufferings of Christ. It does not. It does not focus on what was involved in crucifixion process, how much he bled, how much he suffered, how much he was agonized, how painful, how torturous, and how cruel crucifixion was. It does not focus on that. Okay? But rather, John focused on the fact that he went to the cross and died. Okay? I think that's a very important thing for you and I to understand. However, the gospel do emphasize the concern about Jesus' death for sinners for two ways. Number one, according to God's careful plan and prophecies. Why is that important? It is important. Okay? It wasn't a spontaneous death, but it is something that has been planned for hundreds of years. Carefully constructed and executed and carried out by God Himself. Secondly, I think if you look at the gospel records, you will see that Jesus is not being forced to the cross, but He is fully in control, right? Rather, according to His own accord and voluntarily following the path, the glorious path, majestic path of the cross. I think that's what the Gospels emphasize. That's very different, right? But that's my introduction. But today, as we begin this series, I want to give you some historical background and just kind of like for us to understand what crucifixion is. Can I have the clicker, please? Thanks. Okay, thanks. Crucifixion was universally recognized as the most horrific type of execution in history. I think we just need to understand that. It's a slow, agonizing death. There is a merciful death, like one slain or one shot, and you're dead. That's merciful. People call that merciful death, but this is not opposite extreme of that. This is most agonizing, horrific death, type of death in history. In the East, it was used as a sign of disgrace, usually by decapitation, beheading the criminal. and basically hang the head. And it's just means of showing disgrace. In the West, like Rome, and in the West, crucifixion was practiced first by Persian Empire, which is about 600-700 BC. Later by Alexander the Great, around 350 BC. And Carthaginians, and then eventually to Romans. It's a historic method of executing people. Okay. However, both Greek and Romans restricted crucifixion only to slaves and aliens because it was too dehumanizing, right? And they prohibited to use this method for their own citizens. Roman crucifixion usually involved first flogging, scourging. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. And a criminal basically tied to a post and back is exposed. And soldiers usually have this strap with like tails. And at the end of the tail, there is a sharp bones or metals, kind of like embedded it. So when you whip the criminal, usually those sharp pieces will bite the skin and bite the body, and then you strip and basically scourge, and basically leaving the victims half dead. That's how they began. And tablet or placard was usually carried in front of the criminal, stating what the crime was, often placed around the offender's neck and fastened to the cross after the execution. This is all from the historical documents, okay? And once you arrive at the execution site, the prisoner was commonly tied and nailed to the crossbeam. Okay. Oh, I forgot to mention one thing. Usually the person who's being executed carried the crossbeam to the execution site. Okay. Once you arrive at the execution site, prisoner was commonly tied or nailed to the crossbeam. Contrary to what we know, it's usually not the hand but the wrist, because the hand bones cannot take up the weight. Usually it's right here, right? Historically. And death came about through the loss of blood circulation, followed by coronary collapses, eventually slowly dying in agony by eventual suffocation. Okay. And that could take days for healthy people. So often the victim's legs would be broken below the knees with a club. And I'm mentioning all of these because we see this in the Bible, historical record, okay? Causing a massive shock, and eventually you can't breathe anymore, and you die. And one thing I found interesting was they put a step underneath their feet, not to help the prisoner, but to give them longer pain and death, painful death. Because without it, you will die quickly. But because you have the support underneath your feet, you could just last longer and you could breathe longer, right? So this is a way of executing the victim in slow, agonizing way. When you look at the gospel record and witnesses about Jesus' death after the Jewish and Roman trial, Jesus was scourged, flogged. Could you picture that? He was half dead already, right? And he was mocked with the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And he was mocked and thrown and stripped and beaten with hands and spat on. And he did carry his crossbeam initially until he collapsed, right? And someone else took over. And when he arrived at the execution site, which was Golgotha, he was nailed to the cross, Bible witnesses, and he was lifted up. Could you picture that? He was lifted up. Why is that important? Because numerous times Jesus said, when I am lifted up, Son of Man must be lifted up. Okay? So he was lifted up probably 7 to 9 feet, right? And he had the inscription on the cross saying, which is the name of crime, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Okay, so it just coincides with all the historical documents, and I just wanted to give you that as a background information. But today I want to talk about two robbers. How many of you are familiar with this story of two robbers? It is so interesting that you will find this story in all four Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Isn't that interesting? The book that we are studying right now in the Gospel of John is only one verse. Only one verse. There is a story of these two robbers in Matthew and Mark and Luke and John. What do we learn about these two robbers? Matthew and Mark calls these two robbers olestai. What does that mean? That same word lestai is used for Barabbas in John's Gospel. I think that's very interesting connection, because who was Barabbas? Barabbas was a robber, but who actually was a rebel, an insurrectionist, rebel, and who are guilty of treason. Now, that's something interesting for you to remember. Okay, so Matthew and Mark says they are robbers, and in Isaiah chapter 53, verse 12, this is actually prophesied. Could you take a look at this picture up here? Okay. Isaiah 53 is the famous suffering servant prophecy, which was prophesied about 700 years ago. And you know, and we know, it's about suffering servant. But when you go to verse down to 11 and 12, the story just completely turns around. Okay. This is what is recorded. Out of anguish of his soul, he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous. That sounds like Romans, doesn't it? He's going to make many people righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. It's pretty amazing. And verse 12, therefore I will divide him a portion with the many. What is that? Victory, a battle victory. And he shall divide the spoil with them, because he poured at his soul to death and numbered with the transgressors. That's the prophecy. And then it goes on to say this, very interesting. Yet he bore the sin of many and make intercession for the transgressors. And I was reading this. Could that be same transgressors? He will be numbered as among the transgressors, and he prayed for the transgressors. I think that's not a stretch, but that's what was recorded, and that's what was fulfilled. Okay? So with that as a background, I want to give you a story of two robbers. John's Gospel just mentions just one verse, but it's Luke's Gospel who gives the detail of this story of two robbers. So I want us to go to Luke chapter 23. Basically, he is crucified. Rulers are scoffing them, and people are mocking them, and people are basically yelling at them. See, if you are the Christ, why don't you save yourself? And people are just continue to mocking them and just making fun of him. And here's the story. Only 5 verses. But you're going to see the power of the gospel in these verses. Exactly spelled out. It's pretty amazing. Okay? 2 robbers. The first one. One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself." That's the only thing he says. The first robber, robber number 1, I call him railing robber. And basically, he rails. Even to his last moment of his hour, he rails. Isn't it sad? Right next to Jesus, and he rails. Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us. And then there's a story of robber number 2, second robber, or the repentant robber. But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God? Since we are under the same sentence of condemnation, and we indeed justly for what we are receiving the due reward for our deeds. But this man," referring to Jesus, "has done nothing wrong." And then the second robber said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." That's pretty amazing, right? And then Jesus says just one sentence. And Jesus said to him, "Truly I say to you today, truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." Okay? That's the story. I don't know whether you had a chance to look at this story carefully, but I was pretty amazed as I was preparing for this week. Pretty amazed. Because every category of element of the gospel is in this story. It's pretty amazing. Okay? Let me go over this. The first robber, the railing robber, he railed at Jesus. "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself." You know, he was dying. Time was running out, and finally, it is running out. Right? And he is, if you listen to him, he's angry. And he's bitter. He's probably bitter that he was birthed. He was just cursing his everything, basically. Life, cursing God, cursing his mother and father. He was just bitter and angry. You know what we see is a spiritual destitute or death. He's completely dead. Worldly. I don't care what you are. I don't care who you are. Just save yourself and save me. He doesn't even believe it. He's just cynically just railing it. No faith, no brokenness, no guilt, no penitence, and certainly no humbling. And that's all he's doing. And that's how he dies. Okay? On the other hand, on the second robber, repentant robber, robber 2, R2, okay? The first thing he did, he rebuked him. He rebuked him. What does that mean, he rebuked the first robber? When do you rebuke someone? Listen, that's wrong. That is not right. What you're doing is not right. That is wrong. He's very, very strongly feel that is wrong. Even in his agonizing moment of his death, he's saying, that is wrong. He rebuked him. Don't you fear God? Do you hear it? Amazing thing happened to this, robber, that God became real and began to fear God. Now he's getting the punishment, the condemnation, and he feels that I deserved it. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? That's what's happening. It's pretty amazing. In a critical time like that, something like that could happen to a person. And it gives me hope. It gives me hope, doesn't it? I think that's the power of God. I think that is the gospel of God. And I was thinking about it, and I'm going to give you a little bit in advance. Do you remember the verse when Jesus said, when the Son of Man is lifted up, Son of Man must be lifted up. And when the Son of Man is lifted up, I will draw all men to myself. He's drawing someone to himself, even at a time like this. Can you believe that? Right? So this robber, God became real somehow. Instead of railing against God and cursing his life circumstance, cursing his mother and father who gave birth to him, now he fears God. I think that's what needs to happen. That's what needs to happen. At the same time, he admits that he had done wrong. Do you realize we are condemned like this because of what we have done? What we are receiving is the due reward. It's justice. Right? We're receiving this because of what we have done. Don't say that to him. He does not deserve it. He didn't do anything wrong. Do you see that? He's not about to justify himself and hide and lie and pretend and fight his righteousness. You know, so many people try to do that. So deep inside we try to do that, don't we? I've been Christian all my life. What are you talking about? Try to hide, lie, pretend, and fight so that I look innocent, so that I'm cool. Don't accuse me. But this person, repentant robber, he gave that up. He gave that up. He completely surrendered. Nothing more to hide. I'm just receiving what I deserve. Do you see that happening? Okay. Why is that happening? Because he feared God's judgment. This was God's judgment. Right? This repentant robber not only admitted his guilt, but he accepted this particular punishment in his life as justice. You know, I want to explain something. The difference between justice and grace. And R.C. Sproul explains it like this, and this is brilliant if you could listen to this. Once you get this, you will remember this for the rest of your life. Justice is something you have earned or you worked for. Okay? Justice is something you have earned or you have worked for. Let me give you an example, positive example and negative example. Let's say I go to a store and work all day long for this person, okay? I work 10 hours, let's say, really hard. And at the end of the day, the owner gives me $200. Is that grace or is that something that I deserve? Hello? It's something I deserve, something I worked for, I have earned, right? So that's justice. Let me give you a negative example, okay? I'm driving on a highway, which is 50 miles per hour, and then I was stopped by a police as I was driving 100 miles an hour. And he gives me a fine, a ticket for $500, okay? I earned it. I earned it, and therefore that $500 fine is justice. You understand that? That's justice. In other words, justice is something you have earned and worked for, therefore you deserve it. That's justice. Grace is just the opposite. You did not work for it, you did not earn it, you do not deserve it, but it's given to you. Do you hear the difference? At this critical moment of his life, this robber, repentant robber, realized that I deserve it. That's where we need to come. That's where we need to come. Grace is something that we do not deserve because we never worked for it. Can you look at him? Oops. Does he deserve it? He didn't deserve it. Okay. Yet this robber, this fella, admitting at this final moment of his miserable life, what he lived for and had earned all my life, now he's getting punishment. Justice. Looking at God's justice, God's punishment as justice, something you deserve. Okay? I deserved it. It is justice. You know what he's doing? He finally humbles himself. He doesn't say, I don't deserve this. I deserve better. Try to hide, try to lie, try to pretend. He doesn't do that. He finally humbles himself. Okay. What happened next? This robber, amazingly, at that moment, he saw Jesus on the cross. That's the Jesus that you need to see. I think Christianity is always the same. You need to see God and you need to see you. Then you will need Jesus. The reason we don't care about Jesus is because probably you don't see God. You don't fear God. That's why I feel like I deserve a lot more That's why we are railing deep inside. It's not fair. I deserve much more than this. Right? But once you see God, and then you will definitely see you. Once you see God, then you know you're going to need a Savior. Okay? So thirdly, this repentant sinner, at that moment when he humbled himself, finally seeing himself in light of justice of God and the judgment of God, right? And then he saw Jesus, this man, right next to him. Can you take a look at him? Can you even imagine? Right? And then he goes to the first robber. But this man, Jesus, has done nothing wrong. He sees that Jesus is not a sinner, but righteous person. He is not dying for his own sin. I don't know how much he knew. He is not dying for his own sin. He is a righteous man. Right? Not only he saw that Jesus was the righteous man, this robber saw that Jesus was the king. Can you imagine that? What did he see? This is what I'm imagining. On the cross, he saw Jesus on the cross, right? This robber. And he sees Jesus loving even the ones who are executing him. Lord, forgive them. They do not know what they're doing. Even on the cross, this robber sees that Jesus loving his own mother. I love that story in John's Gospel. We're going to talk about it next week or a week after. There are only 7 sayings recorded that Jesus has uttered while he was on the cross, and one of them is to take care of his own mother. Brothers and sisters, make no mistake about it. Loving the Lord doesn't mean you just abandon your mother. Right? Even at that moment, he saw, even while he was dying his agonizing death, he could barely breathe. He takes care of his mother and his disciple. John, right? John, this is your mother. Dear woman, this is your son. You know, incidentally, I find it very interesting because Jesus had half-brothers. But instead of entrusting Mary, Jesus' mother, to the half-brothers, he entrusts her to John, someone who loved Jesus and followed Jesus. Right? So this repentant robber, boy, this is king. This is a king and this is a righteous man. Right? He saw that. He saw that. On the inscription of Jesus' cross, there is that the record of crime. Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. And John's Gospel records that it is written in 3 languages, right? Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. Aramaic is the language of Israelites, right? God's language. And Latin was the language of the law and power, right? And the Greek was the language of the culture and wisdom, which means Jesus is the King of the world, right? That's what was written. So repentant sinner saw that Jesus was the king of this kingdom. Remember Jesus said, my kingdom does not belong to this world. But I came to this world, and I was born into this world to testify the truth. Truth means what is real? What is reality? And then he said, whoever belongs to the truth will listen to me. Are you listening to him? Right? And somehow this robber number 2 was being drawn to this king. What's happening? What's going on? Same robber saw the same thing. But the first robber doesn't respond like that. But the second robber, at this critical moment, I mean, like, this is like a dream. So many people say, I just want to believe right before I die. Don't you hear people say that? I want to just believe right before I die. I mean, then, let me enjoy my life. Let me believe right before I die. You know what I tell them? What if you die right before you believe? Right? How do you know? People are fools, right? People are fools. Time is running out, and finally it ran out. And still railing. Time will run out, I know I say this often these days. In our prayer meetings, in our meetings, time will run out. I sense it. I sense it in my life, actually. You probably don't feel it as much, but I do. I just have X bracket number of time for me to run. And I don't want to run for wrong things. I want to run. Okay, time is running out and finally ran out. But this repentant robber received mercy. You know why? Because when the Son of Man lifted up, I'll draw all men to myself. He's drawing him. Okay? He saw the power of love. Jesus loving his executioners, loving his mother, loving his beloved disciples. He is righteous and he's powerful King of love. He saw that. He saw that. This is a kingdom. You know what? Because Jesus was drawing him, I want to be with him. I want to be with that kingdom. I want to be with this righteous man. That's what happened to the repentant robber. Is that happening to you? Is that happening to you? So finally, R2, repentant robber, he places trust, right, in Jesus on the cross, and he pleads for mercy. This is what he prays. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me. I want to be with you. Wherever you go, I want to be with you. So I surrender, I put my trust in you. Remember me whenever you come into your kingdom. It's an amazing story, people. I was thinking about this story. Why is this story so highlighted in the Bible? Instead of like pain and agony and blood and sadness and gloominess, why is this story so highlighted in the Bible? Because this is the story of humanity. There are two robbers right next to Jesus, right? And they're both robbers. They're both people who have rebelled against the king and who are guilty of treason. That's us. Remember when we were talking about Barabbas? We are like Barabbas-like people, son of a father, insurrectionist who committed treason against the king. And there are two robbers looking at the king and responding it very differently. The final verse of this story is that when Jesus responds to the robbers, okay, Jesus responds to the first robber who was railing, impenitent, self-righteous, angry, hiding. What was Jesus' response? No response. He just leave him alone. No response. What about the repentant robber? Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And this is what Jesus said to that robber number 2. And this is one of the 7 sayings on the cross. He said, today, you will be with me in paradise. You know what death is? Death is separation. Okay? We went over this on Friday in our Attribute of God class. Death is separation. Let me explain to you. Physical death is when you actually die physically, your spirit and your flesh get separated. Your flesh go right into the tomb or grave, and your spirit go right into the presence of God. Or right into the Hades. I know I've been explaining this. What happened to Jesus when he died? His corpse right into the tomb, but Jesus went right to the paradise where Father is. You understand that? That's the physical death. What is spiritual death? If you remember Genesis chapter 3, right? When sin, God said to Adam and Eve, when you eat of this fruit, you will surely die. You will surely die. When Adam and Eve disobeyed and eat the fruit of tree of knowledge and evil, what happened? They were expelled from the presence of God. They were separated from the presence of God, so their spirit was dead. That's death. That's spiritual death. Which means, if you don't have Christ and regenerated your spirit is dead right now. Amazingly, in Ephesians chapter 2, we were dead in sin and transgressions. What does that mean? We're alive physically. So what does that mean? Spiritually dead. We were born dead to God. Dead to the things of God. We have no appetite. We can't hear anything. We don't feel anything. Do you understand that? But Jesus is saying, now they are dying physically. Today, you will be with me in paradise. Is Jesus saying he's going to die or he's going to live? He's saying he's going to live. Jesus is saying, today, you'll be with me in paradise with the Father and you will live forever. Isn't that amazing? That's the gospel, people. Just a few final words. We're looking at both robbers, and we know this represents all of us. We are like lest high, rebels, guilty of treason, sitting on a throne of the king. We were born that way. Time is finally running out, and eventually runs out, right? First robber railed, cursed at him, did not fear God, and he died. And he died. His spirit was separated from his flesh. He died dead. You understand that? He died dead. His spirit was dead, and he died dead. What about the second robber? Somehow he feared God. God was real. God's judgment was real. He feared God. Do you fear God, people? Do you fear God? I'm hoping to deliver God's word on behalf of the Lord. Do you fear God? Right? Do you fear his judgment? Do you fear his justice? Until you see that, you won't see anything because you are dead spiritually. Until you see that. You won't see anything. But this man, somehow, miraculously, able to see justice of God and judgment of God, and he feared God. And then he saw Jesus. And then he saw Jesus, right? Jesus lifted up. Do you see Jesus lifted up, my brothers and sisters? And he said, when the Son of Man is lifted up, I will draw all men to myself. That's the only way that your spirit will come alive. That's the only way. But that's the only way we need. That's the only way that's truly possible. Okay? What did he see? He saw Jesus was no sinner, that he was righteous, and he was righteous king. And he is the king of his kingdom. Not of this world, but different kingdom. Kingdom of love, kingdom of power. He saw that. Have you seen it? Don't worry about other people. Your salvation is not contingent about anybody else. At the end of the day, when you stand before the Lord, it's not even going to be your wife. It's not your mother. It's not your pastor. It's not which church you went to. It's going to be you and Jesus. Isn't it? It's not your title. It's not your length of the church. It's not what kind of pedigree. It's not like how much you worked for. No. Salvation is by grace and grace alone. Remember? Grace is not something you did not work for, you did not earn, something you do not deserve. Okay? Somehow his eyes were opened. Somehow his spirit came alive. He feared God. He saw himself. And then he saw Jesus on the cross. He is righteous. He is king. I want to be with him. Eventually he humbled himself. Eventually he pleaded for mercy. Gospel truth is, truly I say to you, today, right now, people, not after you die, today you'll be with me in paradise. Your spirit comes alive right now, not after you die. That's the resurrection. In other words, believers die alive. Unbelievers die dead. If you could follow what I'm saying. Spiritually, they were dead and then they die physically. That's unbelievers. That's the robber number one. But the believers, by the grace of God, they're alive. And they die physically. But spirit lives forever. Isn't that what Jesus said? Jesus said, if you believe in me, you will die. You will live even though you die. That's physical death. But if you live and believe, that's us, spiritually alive, you will never die, Jesus said. Because I am the resurrection and the life. My brothers and sisters, I pray that you will look to the cross like the second repentant robber. Or else you'll be railing. You'll continue to rail. Right? I deserve more. Why is life like this? Cursing this life, cursing this country, cursing the leaders of this nation. No, people. May God show grace and mercy that he has shown that robber to you and I, right? So that we could live and be able to say, Jesus, remember me. Remember me. I want to be with you. I surrender to you. I put my trust in you. I plead for your mercy. Okay? May that grace be upon you and upon all of you. Let's pray.